A very warm welcome to today's vodcast. My name is James West and I'm the Relationship Director at Magus Private Wealth. Today I'm honoured to be talking to someone who is not only a client of Magus, but also someone who I'm honoured to call a friend, or perhaps I should say my dear old friend, and that is the nation's favourite cricket commentator, Henry Blofeld. Hello, Henry.
My dear old thing, how very nice of you to say all those lovely things about me. Very kind.
You can pay me later, Henry.
Well, my dear old thing, I will. I need a corkscrew to do that.
Now, I'm feeling very nervous today, Henry.
Oh, really?
The last member of the West household that interviewed you was my 11-year-old son, Jack, last year. So I'll do my best to be just as good as he was last year.
Well, as long as you're better than you are in the office, I don't mind.
I've got no response to that whatsoever.
Well, you haven't, have you? I got a wicket with my first ball.
You called me a googly. You certainly did. First ball of the day. Henry, help me set the scene for everybody who is listening by telling us where you are talking from today.
I'm talking from my little cottage down in Norfolk, where my family live, where I came from. I mean, I was born in the house my brother lives in, which is about a quarter of a mile or so, a bit further up the road or up the drive. And when I moved out of London, I've got this cottage, which I rent from the family, and I have my house in Menorca. And the idea is, well, until COVID came along, that is, that we were going to live in both places, probably more in Menorca than here, but dear COVID has forced it to be the other way around at the moment.
It has, unfortunately. So I was going to start with that. We're at the day of our recording, we've just woken up to being in lockdown 3.0. So how has the pandemic been for you? How's it affected your daily routine in your days?
Well, I think the first lockdown last summer was actually rather fun. It was an adventure. None of us done it before. The weather was absolutely smashing. Rural Norfolk's not a bad place to be. Farm shops are around the corner, so to speak, and everything was splendid. The second one then got much, much harder work. I've been writing a book this summer. In fact, I've been writing two. And my first children's book, and I've got a book about exciting test matches, exciting one-day internationals, mostly test matches, which comes out next October rather. And it was going fine. But when the second lockdown came, I settled down to write. And I think I don't think I'm likely to be depressed, because I'm not really that sort of character. But I just couldn't there was no enthusiasm. I found I couldn't write. It was ridiculous. And funnily enough, I rang up my publisher, who's I think published 11 or 12 books of mine, and we know each other pretty well. And I was saying this to him. I said, I simply can't write. He said, the funny thing is, you're the fourth author I've talked to this morning, and all of them have said the same thing. And I think looking back on it and feeling now, I need the adrenaline of my very busy, hectic life, which, James, you know about only too well, to sort of keep me going. But actually, there is another thing now. I think I will be all right with this lockdown, because I've got the pressure of a deadline now. And nothing concentrates the mind like that, does it?
Absolutely. So what?
But also, I mean, the great thing is I've done a huge amount of reading. I don't not say I'm catching up my reading, because I've got hundreds of books in this house which I've not read and which I long to. And I mean, I'm getting through some wonderful, wonderful books, and that's been terrific fun. Valeria, my lovely Italian wife, is masterful in the kitchen, and so I've had to work very hard not to put on weight. And now, since Christmas, I've gone on a very, very strict diet. I mean, no alcohol or anything of that sort. So I'm sure we have that in common. And yeah, I mean, one's got to keep going. You've got to think, well, the future is going to happen, and it's going to be the spring before it really happens, and before I find myself facing an audience again. But it will happen, I'm sure. And I've had a great piece of luck, James. A week ago today, I went along to the Norfolk and Norwich Hospital, and I had my first jab. I'm what you might call personally rather on the way. Although I think that's probably a little bit selfish to say it, but it just happened like that.
Oh, that's great news that you've managed to get the first vaccine in. That's really important, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I think they say that. I think I read somewhere it's 89% if you have just one, and it goes up to 95% if you have two. I don't know whether I get the two or not because I don't quite know what the situation is. But I believe I'm scheduled for it in a fortnight's time. But one will see what happens. But I'm quite happy with one actually because that makes it very much less likely. Not only that you're going to get it, but if you do get it, you're not going to get it badly. That I gather is the way it goes.
That's right. Oh yeah. Well, fingers crossed for health for you, Valeria, and all of our listeners as well.
Well, thanks.
So let's start. There's only one place to start, and that is talking about Test Match Special. So Henry, talk me through how it all started at Test Match Special for you.
Well, how it all started. Yeah, I will, certainly. I'm just sort of thinking in my mind. It went back. I became a cricket writer of a sort, working for the Times on freelance. I've always been a freelance. In 1962, that was a long time ago, isn't it? And I was writing happily away in the summer about county cricket and enjoying it enormously. And one day, one of my friends, a chap who you may remember, he departed this life nearly 10 years ago now, I think, John Thickness, who was the Evening Standard cricket correspondent, suddenly said to me one day, Blurs or Henry, I can't remember which it was, have you ever thought about commentating? And I hadn't. I mean, I'd always listened to TMS all my life, from when I was really quite a tiny tot, and was fascinated by it. But it never really occurred to me I was going to do it myself. And I said to him, well, how do I go about this? And he said, well, you write off to Robert Hudson, who's the head of broadcast, bracket sound, bracket, important that, at the BBC, and ask for a trial commentary. And I did this. And to my great surprise, he went back and said, certainly. And I went along the Oval. Day Brian Johnston was doing some commentary. And when he wasn't actually working, I recorded down the line to Broadcasting House 2 20-minute segments, which I thought were perfectly ghastly, by the way. Anyway, a couple of weeks later, I went along and listened to them. There was this deputy head of outside broadcasts, and I can't remember his name. He was an enormous man and a great personal friend of Lord Reef, funnily enough. And we listened to them. And I hate listening to myself, but I obviously had to. And at the end of it, he said, I think that's okay. And he said, we all think it's okay. And we've added your name to the list of BBC cricket commentators. And I thought, well, that's not bad. And yippee. And then he did say, and I didn't really take notes of this, he said, but I have to warn you that it's unlikely to be many opportunities in the near future. And I say, I didn't really bother about that. However, when 3 years later, in that was 68, I bet it must have been 71, it was, at the end of September, or the end of August, the end of the summer, the telephone still hadn't rung. I thought, well, maybe there is something in this. And that winter, I went out to the West Indies to write about, for The Guardian, The Observer, and one or two others, the first ever New Zealand tour of the Caribbean. And when I arrived in Kingston, Jamaica, well, the first test was in Jamaica, I found that, which I didn't know, that in every island territory in the Caribbean, there are two broadcasting networks, and they both do cricket wall to wall when there are test matches on. And they both wanted an overseas voice. You know, I mean, when England go abroad, Jonathan Agnew goes and joins the Australian Broadcasting Commission if we're in Australia, or the SABC in South Africa or wherever. And they wanted, and the New Zealand commentator, Alan Richards, joined the government network in the West Indies, the CBU, the Caribbean Broadcasting Union, and the other network, which was owned by Rediffusion, which was a London-based company, were stations in all territories. They wanted someone. A chap came up to me, Winston Ridgard, who was the manager of Radio Jamaica. And he said to me, have you ever commentated about cricket? I sensed a bit of a chance. I said, have I ever commentated about cricket? Good Lord, I've never done anything else. Why? Oh, he said, splendid. And so he said, you're just the man we needed. And so 2 days later, I found myself in the box commentating about New Zealand v Jamaica. Then I went up to Montego Bay, about 60 or 70 miles away, and to Jarrett Park, where the New Zealanders played the West Indies, the president of the West Indies Board of Control 11. And then after that, they asked me to do the test match. And then, obviously, this commentary was used in all the islands, and all the other islands asked me to do it when I was there. So when I came back to England in April, I, what you might call, cut my teeth, and I commentated a full series in front of a much less exacting and demanding audience than I'd have had for the BBC. And when I was a word had got back to England, probably, I had a letter waiting for me from Robert Hudson saying, would I be able to go and do 2 days work for the BBC for Sport on 2, I think it was in those days, at Chelmsford at the old Whit weekend on the Saturday and Monday, because there was no Sunday cricket in those days. And I said, obviously, yes, and went down to Chelmsford and did it. It wasn't really commentary, it was reporting, 30 seconds, 40 seconds, a minute, 10 seconds, that all with a stopwatch. It was quite tricky, but it went okay. And the following Thursday, I got a letter from him again, Robert, saying, would I join Test Match Special for 2 one-day internationals against England, against Australia at Lord's in, I would think, late August, and at Edgbaston in early September. And so there I was. It all happened rather quickly. And I was absolutely scared stiff, but managed to get through both those one days. And then did a bit of one-day cricket next year, but waited for my first test match until the first test at a rather wet Old Trafford, early in June '74, against a weak Indian side. And so that was how it all happened. I mean, it all happened in a rush at the end, but I had quite a long wait before the rush began.
Wow. And the rest, as they say, is history, Henry.
Well, sort of, isn't it? Yes, I suppose. I mean, they didn't find out my sins until after I'd retired, I think.
Now, during your TMS days, you must have a story or two to tell us about meeting the Queen.
Meeting the Queen, yeah, well, we did indeed, yes. I'm just trying to think, the time we met the Queen, which was really very exciting, I'm searching my memory, was in, let's see, when was it? It was soon after the turn of the century. It was at Lord's, when it was the Australians were here, Steve Waugh's Australians, and it was at 2003, 4, it was something around then. And in the normal way, they had 5 test matches, and then I think the one-day internationals came along. And the second test match was at Lord's. Well, well before the summer began, the monarch, or Buckingham Palace, had announced that the monarch was going to go to one day, not the whole day, but part of one day of the test match. It was the second day, the Friday. And the monarch likes to come to Lord's and spend a bit of time in the committee room and meet people in the pavilion and the players during an extended tea interval. And the royal visits always, when her flag, her personal pendant, personal standard, I should say, flies over the England dressing room. And when she's there, and it's all part of a Lord's test match. It's great fun. And anyway, so she announced that she was going to come, and the PR machine at the palace decreed that to mark the occasion, the kitchens there were going to bake the most enormous sort of vice-regal fruit cake, and that she was going to bring it with her and present it to us. Now, TMS had always been full of cakes. This was inspired by Brian Johnston, who loved nothing more than chocolate cakes, in fact. And so, I mean, this was absolutely splendid. And Brian, of course, died sadly, tragically, in 1994. And we moved then rather mysteriously, inexplicably, over to fruitcakes. But then some people do say to me, Blair, surely you must get the connection between fruitcakes and Test Match Special. Well, maybe. And anyway, there we were. I remember I don't think actually the cake came with her in the rolls. I think he went on ahead with a motorbicycle escort. I believe actually the cake was rather miffed at missing out on the rolls, but not every fruitcake gets a motorbicycle escort, does it? Anyway, in the tea interval, I think there were 5 of us. There was Aggers, CMJ, poor old CMJ, Bill Frindle, he's departed this life as well, Peter Baxter, our producer, and me. And we fought our way around against the crowd. We got to the committee room in the nick of time, I think. And there we were. And Peter Baxter, being our leader, so to speak, our producer, received the cake, which was presented to him by the Queen on a huge silver salver. And as she gave it to him, she said, in a rather surprised, slightly disbelieving voice, she said, "They tell me people give you cake." And Bacchus confirmed this was true. And then introduced her to us. And I was, I think, first in the line. And as she shook me by the hand, she said, "You must find it so awfully difficult to know what to say when nothing's happening." And I say, with Your Majesty, one of the great things about Tasman Special is that when nothing is happening, when rain or bad light stops play, we carry on talking about anything and everything. And many of our listeners write in and say how much better we are when nothing's happening than when the cricket's in progress. And I thought that might bring a smile or even a chuckle to the lips of the head of the House of Windsor, but I got that badly wrong. She looked very lugubrious and gloomy, and I mean, she drew back slightly, narrowed her eyes, thought for a moment, shook her head very slightly, and said, "Oh, how dreadfully sad." And so then she took Aggers by the hand, who was next door to me, and in mid-grip, Aggers said, "Ma'am, did you bake it yourself?" Which, as far as lèse majesté goes, it was just about taking the biscuit. But she did very well. She said, no, she said, but it was made under strict personal supervision. And I'm delighted to be able to tell you that at least a pint and a half of really, really good French brandy or royal brandy, I should say, perhaps, went into it. And when we got it back to the commentary box later and we cut it up and had a nibble, you only had to have a sniff and you were pissed. There was so much brandy there. It was absolutely marvelous. And but the funny thing was the final exchange, and I always love telling this to Australians, all my lovely friends in Australia get this whenever I see them. Our final verbal exchange was just before we came back from the committee room in the pavilion to the commentary box, and the play had been going on for half an hour because it was all went on for quite a time. And she turned to Peter Baxter and she said, "With all of you here, how are you staying on the air?" Because, as I say, play was going on, had been going on for half an hour or so. And Baxter said, "Well, Your Majesty," he said, "we have an Australian." She said, "They can be very useful, can't they?" And I always love throwing that one down the Australian thread. But that was my great experience of the Queen, although I was lucky enough once to go and have lunch with about 6 or 7 or 8 of us at Buckingham Palace with the Queen and Prince Philip, which was a great adventure, but that was very much a private occasion, so I'm not going to talk about that.
Completely understand. Wonderful stories. And Henry, we can't leave today's vodcast without asking you to talk us through the last piece of commentary on Lords and that lap of honour that followed on your last day at TMS.
Well, good Lord, I haven't thought about that for a long time. It was something I had no idea was going to happen. I did my last 20-minute spell in company with Tuffers, which was splendid. We giggled about this and giggled about that. I think I made less sense than I normally do. Actually, I don't think I probably got everything wrong. But anyway, it was all very jolly. And when I got up from the commentary, I handed over to Ed Smith. I remember got into a frightful tangle with all the microphones and everything else. And I had to sort of be unwound, I remember. And then our producer, Adam Mountford, said, "Blowers, will you go down with Aggers and Vic Marks so that when the last week falls," and it was almost over, England had almost won, then a couple of wickets, or even only 1 wicket, I can't remember the fall. And then go across, and the prize giving happens always on the ground in front of the pavilion, and help them with that. And so I said, yeah, of course I will. And we all got into the lift. It's the smallest lift in the world, but we sort of got in and got down to the ground. It's also the slowest lift in the world. And then we waited, and it was over then. By then, yes, it was over. That's right. And when we got to the bottom, we went through the little piggy gate by where the covers are on the grass and out onto the pitch. And I was going to walk across, and Agus and Roderick said, "Hey, brothers, come this way." And there's a boundary rope, which is about a yard in from the boundary, so that fielders don't go crashing into the pickets, I suppose. And we walked round more or less between the rope and the thing. Oh, it was no cricket, so we probably were on the outfield, actually, a bit. And I remember saying to Agus, why not then we go across the normal way to the pavilions? There's no cricket. He said, the ground staff don't want us to. So we started off. And within a moment, I found myself about 5 yards ahead of them. And I realized then that I'd been set up. However, the Agus and Vic were commentating. They had microphones behind me. And I just walked on, and the crowd all stood and cheered. It was amazing. And there were 30,000 people. And there was a lovely lady who I think she came up and suggested that we might get married. And I thought, well, I probably better not, because the laws of this country take a very dim view of bigamy. And anyway, I walked on all the way around, and I got to the pavilion. And I was thinking, what on earth am I going to do? When Matthew Fleming, who was the president of MCC, who was Captain Kent and played and captain England one-day side for a very short time, a marvellous man, came up to me and said, "Blaise, you've done half the ground. You now better go and do the other half." So I went all the way around the rest of the ground, and it took quite a long time. And then I came back for the across the ground for the prize giving, which was almost over. And then Joe Root said to me, "Blaise, you better come up to the room for a glass of champagne." So I did. And it was a perfect end to an extraordinary day.
Wonderful. I remember watching that on telly at the time and thinking, what a wonderful way to end your time on TMS. Perfect for you.
Well, it was good. I have a warm glow when I think of it.
Oh, brilliant. Henry, thank you so much for your time today. We will be sharing a series of chats with Henry over the coming weeks to help everyone get through the day. So look out for more in our series of Hanging Out with Blowers.